In the space of 300 years, thousands of men and women were brutally tortured and executed for the crime of witchcraft. No one was safe from the unrelenting vengeance of the witch hunt, not even children. It was truly one of the darkest chapters of human history. Surely an evil such as this can never happen again. Or could it? You're about to see stories that just might change your mind.
Evil temptress, old crone, or modern-day pagan worshiper. Throughout the ages, the witch has captured our imagination and our fear. Is she the personification of evil, or just a figment of our imaginations?
We will take you back into history to the very origins of the witch. Where did they come from? Who were they? And why were they feared? We will look at the many forms that the witch has taken, from the evil old crone, herbal women and midwife, to Satan worshippers and the Wicca, who to this day practice their craft.
In the earliest times of our history, pagan groups such as the Celts worshipped gods that affected their very existence, from the climate, the cycle of seasons, to the abundance of food. The most powerful member of these communities was the healer, often a wizened old woman who performed births, prepared medicines, and performed religious rituals. Such healers prevail well into the 21st century, revered and feared as much today as in centuries past.
Witches were generally associated with malicious acts of harmful magic, normally bewitching humans, bewitching cattle, bewitching goods such as butter and cheese. These are the usual things that witches were accused of.
These women were the magic makers, what we would come to associate as the witches of pre-Christian Europe, and it is thought that they were practitioners of an ancient fertility religion. These so-called witches were integral and vital to the life of their community. However, as Christianity spread throughout the East and the West, the church leaders plotted to stamp out opposing religions by calling both paganism and its worshippers evil and satanic. It is no coincidence that Christian depictions of the devil greatly resemble the Greek and Roman god of the forest, Pan. At the same time, the church broke away from the 7 deadly sins as the basis of Christian ethics. To take its place were the 10 Commandments that strictly prohibited the worship of false gods. This was to have devastating consequences upon the pagan witch. The witch, man or woman, was now seen as a traitor against God. The Christian church's tolerance of other religions was coming to an end. With the pagan gods demonized, the church leaders turned their attention to the symbol of paganism and evil. The name was witch.
There's a growing fear amongst in the church, within the church, that the devil is escalating his work, that the devil is seriously now trying to threaten Christianity at this period, which has always been a problem for people, because they've always been there bewitching cattle, bewitching themselves. But now it's the elite who really take on board the threat of witchcraft from the point of view of Satan's desire to overthrow Christianity.
The witch would make a pact with the devil where she renounced her Christian faith by trampling on the cross and a baptism by the devil. She would show her obedience to the devil by kissing his buttocks. The devil would then put a mark in a concealed spot on her body as a sign of her devotion. It is thanks to this spreading belief amongst the educated Europeans that the once minor charge of malefica, or black magic, changed to that of devil worship.
Well, the whole idea of child sacrifice can be traced way back beyond the witch hunts. The Jews in the medieval period were accused of exactly the same thing. They were accused of ritual murder for magical purposes. The whole idea there was secret sects carrying out these child massacres and so basically satanic acts to undermine Christianity again.
Demonographers also believed that by killing and eating the flesh of children, witches attained many of their magical powers. It was thought that ointments made from the fat of an unbaptized child gave the witch the power to fly. The belief in large, organized, and secretive groups of cannibalistic devil worshippers was not new. Incredibly, it dates back to the Roman times when early Christians gathered together under the cover of darkness to worship. As the tables turned, Christians felt witches were intent on destroying their world.
The church leaders had a powerful tool indeed in the form of the devil. In the 11th and 12th centuries, with pagan religions all but destroyed, the clergy turned their sights upon the growing wave of renegade Christian religions that challenged their complete authority and control.
In the 14th century, the church willingly provided a bitter taste of the slaughter that was to strike Europe. In France, a religious sect known as the Cathars believed in the equal power of Satan as that of God. In the church's eyes, the Cathars were devil worshippers. The Cathars were hunted down, tried by the papal inquisitors, and completely exterminated by the end of the century. Back to 1229, when the Inquisition was established, Dominican monks were placed in charge of investigations into heresy against the church. One of the most important works of the Inquisition was the creation of the book called Malleus Maleficarum, which is Latin for the hammer against witches.
Maleficia, or maleficium, is a legal Latin term which crops up in trial documents usually in association with witchcraft relating to simple acts of harmful magic. Normally the bewitchment of humans, the bewitchment of animals.
The Malleus Maleficarum became the textbook for the witch hunter who scoured the countryside looking for signs of witchcraft.
Perhaps the most important aspect of it, because there were publications before this which were calling for action against witches, for a witch hunt. The key thing about the Malleus Maleficarum is that it was the Pope who endorsed it. This is the first time the Pope officially endorsed a call for active witch hunting, to basically wipe them out, to suppress them, these agents of the devil.
Under the control of the secular courts, the witch trials intensified in both number and cruelty. Distinguished professor of law at the University of Toulouse, Jean Bodin, like many other educated men of his time, thought nothing of burning people at the stake.
Whatever punishment we can order against witches by roasting and cooking them over a slow fire is not really very much, and not as bad as the eternal agonies which are prepared for them in hell. For the fire here cannot last much more than an hour or so until the witches have died.
Like a forest fire out of control, the witch hunts fueled by hysteria and paranoia raged throughout Europe. Fear and a lust for power overcame humanity.
Dominican friars have been preaching around Europe about the evils of witches. They're been trying to, in a sense, incite people to hand them over to them. So there had been this growing momentum for calls for an inquisition to deal with witches specifically.
From the 14th to the 18th century, a reign of terror gripped Europe and America. Armed with the Malleus Maleficarum, and with the power to torture anyone accused of witchcraft, clergy and lawyer alike fanatically fought the evil witchcraft scourge. Thousands upon thousands of men, women, and children were tortured. And all the while, more manuals on torture and witchcraft grew to fan the flames even higher. Would it ever end?
In a world gone crazy, where every slight, every catastrophe of nature was seen as a witch's doing, and where neighbor was pitted against neighbor for revenge, fear, or money, the use of torture to obtain confessions was nothing out of the ordinary in the burning times. It must be understood that torture was used to get evidence, not as a punishment. The accused was forced under torture to admit to crimes of witchcraft and malefica, and to name other witches that may lurk in the community. These confessions served only to uphold these learned men in their beliefs, and the denunciations ensured that the witch trials burned brighter with each bloody confession. Although torture was meant to be applied in a humane manner, this was often ignored. Fanaticism and the fight against evil left no room for compassion. The range of tortures available and the level of abuse involved resulted in acts of gross inhumanity. Take, for instance, the basic torture of the strappato, in which the victim was suspended by a rope tied to his wrist. Often tortures involved the stretching, squeezing, and cutting of flesh, the crushing of bones, the removal of nails, fingers, thumbs, and toes, the tightening of spiked bands around the head, prayer stools made of sharp spikes in which the victim was forced to kneel, the rack, eye gouging, rope burns on sensitive parts of the body, constant flogging, and the use of red-hot pincers. In Bavaria, the year 1600, the young Duke Maximilian, obsessed about the dissension amongst his barons and the rise of vandalism and robbery, desperately searched for a way to exert control over his subjects. The solution was a public spectacle, a show trial so heinous and revolting that it would leave no doubt in the public's mind who held the reins. The Duke's victims were the Pappenheimers, a desperately poor family who were not only social outcasts, but also Lutherans in a Catholic country. Named as witches by a condemned criminal, mother, father, and their 2 sons were arrested and tortured.
Before Maximilian, the Pappenheimers were stripped. Their flesh was torn off with red-hot pincers. The mother Anna had her breasts cut off and forced into her mouth and then into the mouths of her 2 sons. The Pappenheimers were then made to confess their sins before a cross. Anna's husband, Paulus, suffered immeasurable pain as a heavy iron hammer was dropped on his arms until the bones snapped. The 4 Pappenheimers were tied to the stake and burned alive, while their 3rd son, Hansel, was forced to watch.
It is Bamberg. The year is 1628, the height of the European witch trials. 55-year-old Burgermeister Johann Junius has been accused of witchcraft by a friend under torture. The torturers had said that surely he must be a witch, because he had not felt any pain. In a letter to his daughter Veronica, Johann tells a different story.
God in highest heaven have mercy. The executioner put the thumb screws on me, both hands bound together, so that the blood spurted from the nails and everywhere, as you can see from my writing. Thereafter they drew me up on the ladder. I thought heaven and earth were at an end. 8 times again, so that I suffered terrible agony. I said to Dr. Braun, God forgive you for thus misusing an innocent, honorable man. When at last the executioner led me back to the cell, he said to me, Sir, I beg you, for God's sake, confess something, whether it be true or not. Invent something, for they will continue until you say you are a witch.
Not everyone, though it would seem, was completely innocent of their charges, as the case of Gilles de Rais would point out. By all appearances, Gilles de Laval, Baron de Rais, was a fine, God-fearing and patriotic man. He was a soldier who had fought alongside Joan of Arc as her chosen protector. An extremely wealthy man, Gilles spent large sums of money on religious services held in the chapels of his castles. Services so luxurious and magnificent that his wealth was vanishing. Gilles resorted to alchemy and magic. His advisor, Father Francesco Prelati, allegedly used the blood and bones of over 800 young children for the magic powders. It was also believed Gilles enjoyed killing mostly young boys, who he would then sodomize before and after decapitating. Bishop Malestroit had been secretly preparing charges of witchcraft against Gilles, and the beating of a priest from an argument over land was the final nail in his coffin. Gilles de Rais, the richest man in Europe and nobleman, was brought to trial on charges of witchcraft and heresy. 47 charges ranging from calling demons through spells, abuse of clerical privilege, and sexual perversions against children were filed against Gilles.
The whole case of Gilles de Rais links in with other sort of political sorcery trials, what we might call political witchcraft. We'll have Madame de Montespan in France as well. This is an interesting aspect of the witch trials, because obviously when we look at the totality of the number of people executed, the vast majority are what we might call the lower classes. Yet there's this very narrow number of elite cases, and they usually do with political intrigues.
On October 21st, 1440, Gilles de Rais was put to torture. 5 days later, he was simultaneously burned and hanged. Was he a serial murderer, or a victim of another man's greed? Coming up, we will explore the world of the modern witch, both good and bad.
What I'm talking about right here, right now is no, modern witches do not sacrifice animals, we do not sacrifice babies, we do not rob someone else's life to empower our own.
And the town that would forever be tied with witchcraft, Salem, Massachusetts.
With the rise of Christianity came the downfall of witchcraft. Centuries later, as the Christian churches are losing their stranglehold on the hearts and minds of their followers, the practice of witchcraft, or Wicca, is once again more popular than ever. In this modern day of technology and science, many are flocking back to witchcraft because of a desire for natural wisdom. As we will show you, there is a darker side too, one that is tied to Satanism and the practice of evil, of animal sacrifices, and murder.
Throughout the ages, the witch has taken many different forms. In the time when Celtic tribes roamed throughout Europe, witches were healers and mystics. Both men and women were practitioners of the magic in a religion that revered nature and fertility.
That image it's an image that came about in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, around the burning time when the Christian church was, and the burgeoning medical establishment, was seeking to suppress the power of the village healer or the wise woman, or the role that women had in society at that time as nurturers and healers.
Even today, the witch in children's stories is depicted as an ugly old crone luring children into fiery ovens or giving poisoned apples to a virginal Snow White. Fiona Horn, acclaimed rock star and witch, has written many books on the subject of white witchcraft.
The image of the old cackling hag, I think, came from a period when people lived in fear and ignorance in the Dark Ages.
According to some historians, this idea of the witch is actually a throwback to the days when men and women struck by mental illness or simply old age were accused of witchcraft and executed. Few people realize that as they tell their children stories of the evil old witch, they are passing on the legacy of cruelty and murder. Another common description of the witch is as a sexually predatory woman who consorts with her lover, the devil, to commit acts of sexual depravity and evil.
Throughout Western history, the idea of the witch is one that's always been associated with the devil. Today we have neo-pagans, people who have recreated a pagan religion based on whatever evidence they could find and whatever creativity they could muster to start a religion, since all of them begin somewhere. But Satanism also believes that we have a certain claim on certain elements of the title of witch. Our women generally consider themselves to be satanic witches because they use glamour and fascination to manipulate the men in their lives to get things that they want out of them. It's not a requirement, but it's an option, and it's one that's actually very effective. It's been effective since the dawn of time. So our satanic witches are proudly out there doing what they need to do to get what they want.
As a female witch, I embrace that term, and so I am a witch. And yes, think about it. I am empowered, I am independent. You know, I know what I want and I know how to get it.
Although witchcraft can be traced back to the pre-Christian magical practices, the witchcraft, or Wicca, that we know of today was actually introduced in 1951 by a British civil servant by the name of Gerald Gardner. Gardner was himself a member of a coven at a time when Britain still had an anti-witchcraft law. As late as 1951, British law stated that witches were to be put to death for the practice of witchcraft. In 1954, Gardner wrote and published the book Witchcraft Today. Gardner brought Wicca into the spotlight and gave it legitimacy in a modern society that it had not seen for centuries.
Queen of heaven, queen of hell, of the night,
Wicca is a nature-worshipping, goddess-oriented religion. We believe that nature is sacred and that we as a part of nature are sacred. We not only recognise the god energy, we also recognise goddess energy.
Those who practice Wicca as a religion believe in a creative force that is both masculine and feminine powers. The underlying truth in Wicca is that the universe in which we live is alive, and the various elements are given different names. Contrary to popular belief, Wiccans do not believe in the devil. Belief in the devil and in the presence of evil is a Christian concept that has been used to drive people away from the pagan religions, such as witchcraft.
Most witches, I would say, don't believe that there is an inherently evil force out to get you. Much like, I say, like when I was brought up as a young Catholic, I was taught to believe that the devil was there ready to jump on me if I did something wrong or to grab my soul at any chance he had. And as a witch, I don't relate to that concept of a prevalent evil in the universe. Its energy is neutral, and how you interpret it and work with it is what it does. As a witch, I more focus on what there is to enjoy in life and what there is to be empowered by in life in a positive and constructive sense. And an analogy I use, it takes a lot more power to heal someone that has been shot by a gun and injured by a bullet than it takes to fire the bullet.
Many associate the color black with evil and the powers of darkness, and of course witches. Many witches will argue that they are not evil, and neither is the color black. Witches wear black because it is like a battery that draws in energy and light. Black is a highly symbolic and powerful color in many religions, including Christian faiths. From the first execution of Bridget Bishop in 1692, Salem has been inextricably linked with witchcraft. Today, Salem draws more than 1 million visitors each year. Clearly, the fascination of the witch has not waned, and ironically, a community of modern witches has come to Salem as a safe haven to practice their craft. Lori Cabot, a practicing witch for over 40 years, was the first witch to live publicly in the city of Salem. She is known as the official witch of Salem.
I think witchcraft is really popular today because people are looking for answers. They're looking for something that's going to help them live life now, as we experience life now. And a lot of the older religions are based more on the past than on the future. It's a religion, it's a spiritual path of discovery and personal development. So I think that's why it's relevant now, because people aren't as gullible as they used to be.
Adult fears are overstated because of response to the word witch, which is linked to the demonic. However, while white Wicca is good, we have to be careful about people opening up a dimension of the spiritual world, which is demonic.
In the small parish of Salem, Massachusetts, 2 young girls listened to the tales of a West Indian slave, Tituba, which was to set in motion one of the most tragic events in American history. The Puritans had settled in Massachusetts to escape the religious persecution in their homeland, England. The Puritans had a strict moral code. Strangely, the girls were afflicted by fits, which were soon seen as witchcraft. Tituba confessed to witchcraft and named Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne as fellow witches. Tituba mysteriously was released and disappeared, never to be seen again. Both Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne were hanged for witchcraft. From that moment on, hysteria swept the once quiet community. Accusations raged until the last execution in September 1692.
Whether witches exist or not is not really a question in a sense for the historian, because if people believe there are witches, in a sense there are witches. Perhaps one way of looking at the question is, were those accused of witchcraft, did they believe they were witches? And the vast majority would probably have to say no. Yet again, some people in the past certainly did believe they did possess powers of harmful magic.
Despite witch trials that saw thousands upon thousands of innocent men and women tortured and murdered, witchcraft has survived and continues to flourish.
The link between Satanism, witchcraft, and crimes, such as animal mutilations and killings, child sexual abuse and human sacrifice, often of missing homeless children, is not new to any police detective in the world. Rather than worship pagan gods, many have chosen to revere the very heart of evil itself, Satan.
Like the many branches of Christianity, witchcraft too has many different denominations. These denominations are known as traditions, and this diversity exists because of the environment in which witchcraft evolved. Out of this atmosphere of secrecy and hiding came a perverted form of witchcraft.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be the names in heaven as it on earth. Deliver us to devil as well as temptation. For we are your kingdom, for eons and eons.
A witchcraft of sacrifices, both animal and human, sexual abuse, and demonic worship.
Sacrifice this child of night. So mote it be.
With the resurgence of popularity in witchcraft, will there be resurgence in gruesome crimes?
In witchcraft, yes, there are spells you can do that are to do with hexing or having power over other people or causing harm. Much like there's spells that you can do to heal people, to help people, and to give people their power back, or to, you know, just whatever. What I think is good about witchcraft is that it encourages in the individual witch a sense of responsibility.
Today, thanks to popular television shows and movies, thousands of teenage girls are dabbling in witchcraft. In a poll of the top 60 interests of teenage girls, witches are #1. It's the fastest growing spiritual practice in the United States.
Witchcraft as a religion is growing in popularity at a time when the planet is environmentally challenged, when humans themselves are going, oh, hang on, what are we actually here for? More than ever, people are turning their backs on the major world religions and saying, you know, a book that was written thousands of years ago doesn't have any relevance to me and how I live my life now. I'm looking for answers to the questions I'm asking now. And that's what witchcraft is doing. It's a new religion evolving.
The Gold Coast, just below the Great Barrier Reef, is world famous for its golden beaches and sunshine. But recently, locals were reeling from a grisly attack on an elderly resident by 2 young teenage girls. On one of her regular walks through Parkland, she was attacked from behind by the 2 girls who, without mercy, slashed her throat with a knife. It is alleged that the 2 girls, aged 16 and 17, were members of a witchcraft occult. A website by Christian organization Logos Communication Consortium has this to say about witchcraft.
While many Wicca cult members offer fruit and vegetable sacrifices to their pagan gods and goddesses, blood offerings and animal or human sacrifices are a part of historic pagan and witchcraft rites. It is becoming increasingly frequent in the witchcraft community today. Historically, human sacrifice has been associated with witchcraft.
Others argue that
there are a small segment of Wiccans who practice abortion as a form of child sacrifice to their false gods.
The early Christians were also accused of child eating as well, of child sacrifice. So it's a myth which goes back at least 2,000 years, and it just keeps being transposed on different scapegoats throughout the centuries. So in the sense, the witches are the last of the child eaters in this respect.
As far as the animal sacrifices and stuff go, no. And if anyone's doing stuff like that, it's they're wankers, not witches. It's just buying into that whole evil stereotype, the satanic thing. It's just got nothing to do with real witchcraft and where it's going today.
to become a witch, there must be a spoken denial of the Christian faith, rebaptism in the devil's name, oath of allegiance to the devil, a promise to sacrifice children to the devil, marking the initiate with the devil's mark, a pentagram.
To actually take the life of something to use in magic is ultimately a self-defeating act. It's asking for trouble. You know, the killing of animals and all those kind of things that are sometimes reported on in the papers and attributed to witchcraft is again misinterpreting what the word witchcraft is. I know the word has been used to describe negative and negative or evil acts, but what I'm talking about right here, right now, is modern witchcraft, where it's going right from here into the future. This burgeoning growth, this wave of new witchcraft, Wicca, has got nothing to do with all that kind of stuff.
With the resurgence of witchcraft, so too has another evil followed: the witch hunter. If you thought that the gruesome chapter of the witch trials could never happen again, we'll prove you wrong.
Every day, hundreds of men, women, and children are beaten to death, mutilated, or hanged because they're suspected of being witches. The witch hunter of today is just as brutal and just as vicious as the witch hunter of the past. It is hard to comprehend that the simple belief of a witch in our midst is enough to drive a person to murder. But as these next cases will show you, perhaps there is a lot more behind these murders than a simple fear of black magic.
Since the burning times when man first feared the witch, there has been the witch hunter. One of the most notorious was a traveling lawyer called Matthew Hopkins. Hopkins, it was later discovered, was a dishonest inquisitor who made a living purging towns of witches. In return, the grateful folk would pay him exorbitant amounts of money. One of the trials used to test a witch was the lack of pain or presence of blood when a suspected witch's mark on her body was pricked. These marks could be moles, warts, or even bunions. What these villages may not have known was that Hopkins, like so many others of his kind, used a retractable bodkin, or witch pricker, to stick the witch's mark. Naturally, Hopkins' victim would not feel a thing. Well, not until further trials of torture. Today, the witch hunter is a lot less bothered with trials or proof. In the small town of Vicente Guerrero, 80 miles southeast of Mexico City, an entire family, including 4 children, were stabbed to death by 3 men. On November 6, 1996, 2 brothers, Florencio and Constantino Mckinley, and a third man brutally stabbed and murdered Eduardo Kiowa and his wife Andrea and 4 children between the ages of 6 and 12. The suspects claimed the victims were witches responsible for the deaths of Florencio's wife and 2 daughters. The murderers themselves are considered to be part of a cult. In East Java, Indonesia, since September 1998, more than 153 people have been murdered by groups of men clad in black, wearing ninja-style masks. The victims have been mostly Muslim cleric, black magicians, and other people accused of sorcery. The killers have struck against the sorcerers at night, cutting their throats, and sometimes hanging their mutilated bodies in trees or tossing them in the streets. Victims sometimes have been cut into small pieces and their bodies thrown into the mosques. Shocked by the mysterious murders, Indonesia's justice minister proposed outlawing black magic. In scenes reminiscent of the Salem witch hunts, mobs have also attacked and killed people suspected of being black magicians. In the small village of Terikovo, Russia, on the night of February 22nd, Sasha Labadkin and his nephew Sergei Gretsov went on a witch hunt. Armed with hammers and knives, they entered the house of the woman they claimed had cast a hex on them. When they were done, one woman was dead. 4 of her 5 children were on the way to the hospital. Tanya Tresova suffered several hammer blows to the head, but survived. In a land ruled by superstition, Tanya had the misfortune of a lazy eye, a sign of the demon in pagan religion. Quoted in a news article about this tragic case, Reverend Alexander Bulikov, Moscow Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, had this to say.
We have had in this country a very long period of total absence of spiritual education, and people completely forget what religion really means. People have lost their spiritual immunity to resist evil. They have become confused, and they often have trouble knowing what is good and bad.
Throughout Africa, ritual slayings are creating fear and havoc in the countryside. In the dead of night, or even in broad daylight, the vulnerable are hunted down and slain. Scratch the surface of these grisly murders, and you will see disgusting crimes of greed and revenge.
Over 250 cases of witch killings were documented in the northern province in 1994. June 5, 1995. 6 men were sentenced with 30 years each for stoning to death 2 women suspected of witchcraft in Leidenburg. In July 19, 1996, 2 teenage daughters doused their 55-year-old mother with petrol and burned her to death in a village near Hammanskraal. April 1997, a Swazi pastor and his wife were hacked to death by members of a rival church. The victims were accused of killing the rival church's choir master with witchcraft. January 27, 1998, in northern Ghana, 2 women aged 55 and 60 were clubbed and stoned to death by masked vigilantes. These news reports are just a drop in the ocean. Hundreds upon hundreds of Africans are murdered every month. The murderers claim that they were witches. Look closer and you begin to see a pattern occur. Most of the victims are women and elderly. Why? In the Shinyanga region south of Lake Victoria, the Sakuma people have always believed in witchcraft, even when its practice was repressed by German and then British colonialism. It is estimated that over 90% believe in sorcery and mysticism and have resisted conversion to one of the 2 dominant religions, Christianity or Muslim. Since the country's independence in 1961, there has been a marked resurgence in witchcraft. In 1998, police arrested 4 miners who had brutally slain a taxi driver in a ritual sacrifice. The police also arrested the medicine man who had told the miners that the sacrifice would bring them fortune. Superstition and greed are a deadly cocktail on the African plains, and elderly women are paying the ultimate price. In the dead of night, a group of 2 or 3 men dressed in black, armed with torches and razor-sharp machetes, break into the house of their victim. Relatives, startled and naturally frightened, are forced to identify the woman the masked men are after. The terrified woman is identified, and the relatives watch on powerlessly as the masked men hack at her body with their machetes until she is dead. It is unimaginable the terror and fear that these attacks incur. They happen night after night, and no one is safe. Police Chief Wolfgang Gambu has seen plenty of these attacks, enough to know what the real motives behind them.
The women are simply victims of attempts by their next of kin to get them out of the way and inherit their property.
In a recent article about the witch slayings in Africa, Sergeant Stephen Ramabula of the Witch Unit of the South African Police Force is quoted to have said,
Generally, if people believe there's a witch in the village, they will consult the Nkanga, a witch doctor. He or she will then sniff out the witch. The person who is accused will then be killed or ordered to leave the village.
The slayings of women suspected of witchcraft has taken such epidemic proportions that many women accused of witchcraft have fled their villages, leaving families and properties behind. The problem has become so serious that women in rural areas have been described as an endangered species. To combat this witch hysteria, Africa is witnessing a new phenomenon: witch sanctuaries. In 1998, police in the northern province investigated over 150 murders of suspected witches. The problem has become so severe that villages have been set aside by the South African police as witch sanctuaries. 60 kilometers outside of Petersburg, Helena, is just one of 10 havens for men and women accused of witchcraft. But despite the number and severity of these witch hunter murders, few have ever been brought to trial. Sergeant Stephen Ramabula of the Witch Unit of the South African Police Force explains why.
If someone is accused of murdering a witch, the community tends to support them by supplying money for an advocate when the case comes to court. There is solidarity. After all, that person is accused of ridding the village of a witch.
So, have you made up your mind? The burning times lasted for 300 years, and in that time, thousands were tortured and killed. Even now, somewhere in the world, a witch is practicing her magic. Somewhere else, a witch hunter is sharpening his weapons, ready to kill. The question to ask then is, do witches exist today? Have they ever existed outside our own fears and primal superstitions? Are they evil villains or innocent victims? In history and in many cultures, the witch has been seen as the human face of evil. But does the witch really exist?
Witchcraft is a way of interpreting misfortune, a way of seeking to understand the unknown, particularly when it means something bad. When something bad happens, how do you explain it? Someone has to be responsible, particularly in a world where we have little control over nature, or natural forces, or disease, or don't know so much about disease, etc. When something happens, you seek an explanation for it. And in that sense, you look towards the supernatural. Some people, that could mean fairies, that could mean the devil, or it could mean witches. But there's always this malevolent, supernatural other being, which helps explain what is otherwise inexplicable.
Well, our satanic witches basically use three different elements of lesser magic. They're sex, sentiment, or wonder. And those are elements that they pull together in their appearance to basically make some kind of impression on the people that they want to manipulate.
Most modern witches would obviously renounce any idea or concept that they were satanic. For one thing, many modern witches are pagans, therefore they do not believe in Christianity. Satan is a Christian concept. Therefore a Satanist has to believe in Christianity, and most modern witches do not. They subscribe to pagan beliefs. So there is a quite fundamental and clear separation between satanic worship and much of what modern pagan witchcraft is about.
Because the image people have of witches is that we can do, evil spells and hex people and have power over people in that sense. But I actually find it far more empowering to heal and to do constructive, positive things. Modern witches do not sacrifice animals. We do not sacrifice babies. We do not rob someone else's life to empower our own. It just doesn't happen. As a modern witch, along with all the other witches I know, the ones that read my books, or the ones that read other people's books, or the ones that watch Buffy or watch Charmed or whatever, who would relate to the concept of that is a witch, all I can say is that, it's just about educating and just letting people know that it's, and where will we be in 100 years' time? Hopefully we won't have these sad negative stereotypes of witches being evil.
In the dictionary, evil is defined as that which violates the moral law, harmful, the force that brings about wickedness or sin. The witch has shown us that where intolerance and fear are present in man or woman, evil will soon follow. With the popularity of witchcraft growing with every passing day, are we to see a repeat of the horrors of the burning times? For the Sci-Fi Channel, I'm James Reeves.